president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. The economic outlook for the United States took a beating with all the events in Europe, with Spain seeking a bailout, Greece around the corner, and the United States economy is sputtering along. Does stimulus help jobs? Does the government help jobs? This is the basic argument between conservatives and liberals, between Democrats and Republicans. It's the main argument I want to discuss tonight with my guest. He is a conservative strategist, Matt Robbins. Welcome to the Inside
Thank
Scoop.
you, Mark.
Let me start with what's going on in Europe, and then I'm going to get specifically to the United States. It seems to me that the problem that Spain is having right now is not the same as the problem with Greece. Greece, they overspent, no question about it. That's pretty obvious. Spain did the opposite. Spain cut back. Spain was a model of fiscal rectitude. Spain practiced austerity ever since 2007. And with the austerity caused a lot of hardship because the recession caused by the lack of economic growth meant that less people were paying money into the Spanish tax system. More money was going out because more people were in need. And Spain ended up needing a bailout after all. My concern, Matt, with the Republican proposals, with conservative proposals, with Mitt Romney's proposals, is that they want a European-style austerity for the United States. They want to balance the budget today by cutting spending, raising taxes on the middle class, the way Eric Cantor said, and in doing so will harm our economy and not let us out of this recession.
Well, yeah, first of all, as if conservatives, Republicans, and Mitt Romney are all the same thing.
Well, okay.
Well,
you can tell me where they differ.
Their Romney plan is probably considerably different than the House plan under Speaker Boehner and
well, he
Leader
supports
Cantor.
the Paul Ryan plan. He's come out.
He said that, but
he did say that.
I think we will wade into a 48-page online plan at some point that will probably differ from that.
I see. So you have doubts as to whether Mitt Romney can be trusted to.
Yeah, I'm sure you're shocked to hear me say that.
No, I'm not. Actually, not at all.
But all that being said, the European issue is very difficult. I mean, we're seeing some of the same issues and ripple effects, even though Britain is not part of the Eurozone. The austerity measures enacted by Cameron and others have sort of apparently led to a recession. This is sort of an age-old argument, chicken or egg, cart before horse. I would argue that none of these countries have been governed properly in the past couple of decades, thanks to liberal policies. I would argue that the Spaniards are slightly different than the Greeks, and they only sleep half the day instead of the entire day, instead of going to work. The Greeks is a nightmare, and it's infecting the rest of the Eurozone. Germany's going to be paying for this for the foreseeable future. I don't think any competent, sane, conservative legislator is on the floor of the House talking about taxing the middle class in the same ways that President Obama has done it in the past 3 years. But we can quibble about that as the show goes on.
Well, so there's two issues here. The first one is a general, we'll get to the taxes, I promise you in a second, because I want to talk about the fiscal cliff of 2013. And if my voice
we push our grandparents over.
Well, yes, and if my voice sounds a little messed up, it's because I have a bad cold, so I appreciate that your fortitude in sitting next to me, or hopefully I won't give it to you. But on the first question of austerity, now what is austerity? Austerity means cutting back on your budget. It means spending less or taxing more. It means cutting a budget deficit. I would be the first to recognize and agree strongly that you need austerity, you need cutbacks in spending, you need to raise taxes in a time of economic growth. I highly praised Bill Clinton in the late 90s for giving us the best surplus America.
You mean the Republican Congress?
I highly praised
the Congress that has the
President Bill Clinton
power of the purse
in the 1990s. You remember in 1993 when there was a Democratic Congress,
he raised taxes.
You recall,
he didn't cut any spending.
They raised taxes,
right.
And in doing so, they brought us the greatest surplus ever in American history, and did so with the greatest economy, at least in my lifetime.
It didn't hurt that the internet was being created at that same time.
It did not
hurt. And throwing off money like a sieve.
Well, I don't know that it was throwing off money like a sieve. But the best economy, the best surplus, I agree there is a time for austerity. I am not saying...
I never thought I'd miss the days of Bill Clinton, but I do.
But you do, because
thanks to this president.
Bill Clinton had so much peace and prosperity, the Republicans could find nothing to criticize except his private sex life. And I got to tell you, if The only thing you can think to criticize about the President of the United States is his private sex life. He's doing a very good job with the economy. But my point about Bill Clinton is this. There is a time for austerity. There's a time to cut back. There's a time to pay budgets back. I completely agree. And that, I would suggest to you, is a time of big economic growth, a time of low unemployment. Bill Clinton was absolutely right from 93 on through 2000 to cut back on spending at that time. But if you cut back spending in the middle of recession, if you do what Europe is doing now, what England is doing, austerity, causing problems for England and Spain and Greece, I suggest to you it's a lot of what Herbert Hoover tried in 1930. The wrong time to balance a budget is in a recession. What we need is short-term stimulus now and definitely cuts in the budget, but we need that for medium to long term.
Well, first of all, Mark, I mean, we have spent and spent and spent. This president and the liberal Democrat Congress that preceded the current Congress has spent like there was no tomorrow. You could argue, we could sit here and philosophically discuss the moorings of their policies that have extended this recession, that have made it last longer than any comparable recession in American history. And we can talk about the causes of that.
I highly dispute that, but we'll get to that.
Okay, but so here we are, 3.5 years. Can we at least admit now that it is the Obama economy, that it is the Obama?
Not at all.
Okay, so
we'll talk about that too.
6.5 years into the second term,
we'll talk
then we
about
can
that
admit
too.
it's the Obama economy.
No, because
at what point in the second term can you admit that it's the Obama
as soon as the
economy?
Republicans allow President Obama
So the Congress
to put his
prior to
policies
that
in place,
didn't allow any of his policies to go into place.
No, as you know,
they
the
didn't allow the
Republicans-
stimulus. They didn't allow the Affordable Health Care Act.
as you
they
know-
didn't allow any other legislation to go through.
well, the Affordable Health Care Act, as you know, saved money. I mean, this
it
is
hasn't
something.
actually started yet.
Well, no,
Yeah.
it starts in 2014,
Right,
so
right.
that's not an issue
Right.
with regard to the
Okay, I'll
economy.
take it off the table.
You can
Yeah,
disagree with it,
sure,
but that's not about
sure.
the economy. The stimulus package, you may well recall, was filibustered by the Republicans.
Yeah.
Not a single Republican supported it in the
it
House.
should have been killed.
And it got only 2 Republicans to support it in the Senate, but only after he cut in half the aid to the states.
Right.
Now, you know, as I do, or maybe you dispute this. Do you dispute that in a time of
block grants.
Let me ask you, in a time of recession, do you agree with me? I think it's a basic economic principle.
I think
that in a time of
short-term-
recession, deficits go up. They go up because
They do.
governments take less in taxes
do.
and they spend more in
And
welfare.
short-term
and so forth.
infusions are not
Okay.
a problem.
All right.
Year
So-
in and year out infusions are
Absolutely.
a problem.
And a stimulus
and
was a-
using a stimulus to pay off your union pension plans and your big labor buddies.
The stimulus was a
indefinitely
one-time
across
thing.
the states.
It was not an indefinite
It was a
thing.
one-time thing that went into a black hole.
Unlike, say, the Bush tax cuts, which were an indefinite
The Obama tax
expansion.
cuts now.
No, talk about
He approved them.
the Bush tax cuts.
He's extended them.
The Bush
Your
tax
president
cuts.
has extended them.
The Bush tax
Did
cuts.
he not approve them in December?
We'll talk about that in a second. The Bush
So
tax
nothing he
cuts,
does is
the
he's
Bush tax
responsible
cuts
for.
that began in 2001.
Right, right.
Okay. You would agree that it's the wrong time. You know, Bush, of course, what did he do? He did the opposite of austerity. He had massive tax cuts and
spent
massive
way too
spending
much.
in a time when our economy did not have unemployment
Bush's
of 8 or 9%.
spending was an insult to drunken sailors.
We agree on that.
We do.
So we agree that that was the wrong time to do it. But I'm telling you that where we disagree is that in a recession, I think is the right time to do it. We both agree Clinton was right not to spend when the economy was good. We both agree that Bush was wrong to spend when the economy was good. I suggest to you that Obama is right, not because the Bush tax cuts were right, but because extending them in a period of recession makes sense as long as you're going to have a deficit cutting measure in the moderate to long term. And I should announce, and I know you know this, Obama has cut discretionary spending to its lowest level of any president in modern times.
Slowing down the rate of
growth
increase is not cutting, Mark. I mean,
no,
let's be clear.
Far less than not only Bush, but Clinton,
Cutting
Reagan,
down,
George W. Bush.
Reducing future projected growth is not cuts.
Lower than any president.
That is hardly austerity.
In the past
Your word
30 or 40
austerity at
years.
the start of the segment talks about belt tightening, talks about hard measures, cutting COLA, cutting these small incremental increases across the government.
No pay increase for government employees.
There's no pay increase for millions of Americans who don't have jobs right now.
Oh, but there is for the 1%. They're doing very, very well. Corporations, and I know you know this.
They're people too, Mark.
No, they're not. My Constitution.
I was kidding.
My Constitution has no mention that corporations are people. You were kidding, but Mitt Romney wasn't.
He was not. I disagree with you. I disagree with Mr.
Exactly,
Romney.
and you have much more sense than your nominee. But
that said, I believe corporations should have some free speech.
Whether or not a state decides to give corporations free speech is completely up to them. They are creatures of the state. They are legal fictions.
There we go.
If we want to give them some rights, I'm fine with it. But they don't have any rights right here.
I agree.
This
you
doesn't
can't
give them
search and
any.
seize them. Yeah.
Let me go to the question of the corporate hoarding of cash. There's almost $2 trillion. That's right. It's 1.8
Under the
trillion
mattresses.
sitting there in multinational
JP Morgan
corporations,
Chase,
American
Goldman
corporations,
Sachs.
banks, they're not spending it.
Right.
Let's talk about why. I have a very clear reason why. I suspect yours is different from mine. But one thing we do agree on is there was a study by economists that said that if they spent 20% just of that $2 trillion, $400 billion in the private sector, that at least some economists have said could drive our economy below unemployment below 6%. Which I don't even know if we go that if we need 20%. That's pretty dramatic, and they're not spending it, and it's the most cash they've ever hoarded in American history. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. That's right, Scrooge McDuck levels. Let me tell you why I think that's happening. I think that's happening because there's not enough demand in the economy. I think they're happening because consumer confidence isn't strong enough because not enough people are buying their products. If you're a corporation and you sell cars or you sell paper or you sell computers, whatever it is, if there are not enough people wanting your products,
so Apple's, Ford, Chevys aren't flying off the shelves right now.
Well, actually, they're actually doing pretty good.
They're flying off the shelves right now.
Apple, because Apple's a very good company, but maybe
Ford and Chevy.
Maybe Dell is not doing as well. Ford and Chevy, of course, were aided by government stimulus.
That we'll claim credit for, not the economy, but that part of the economy we'll claim credit for.
But when it comes to sort of ordinary businesses, they're not spending because there's not enough demand for the products. If there was demand for their products, they would make more of whatever they make.
Let me introduce you.
You disagree.
Let me introduce you to a basic psychological human principle, Mark, and that is Americans don't like to be told what to do. This social engineering, this redistribution that Obama talked about to a guy as wacky as Joe the plumber, this sort of cat out of the bag moment he had with him, it's better when you spread it around. All the economists in the world, all the social engineers, all the government bureaucrats, all the wonks and green shades at the CBO can sit on the sidelines and jump up and down and hold their breath till they're blue in the face. Private enterprise, private equity has the right to sit on money if they want to. My grandmother has the right to sock it in her mattress. Your grandmother has the same right. They can spend it, they can not spend it. There's no government entity that says you have to go spend that money. They don't know what the hell is coming down the pike as far as this administration because they're holding their cards. He won't lead, he won't push for more tax cuts or more tax increases. He won't actually go out there and put any skin in the game. He'll let Congress take care of the Health Care Act. So they're waiting to see what happens.
They're waiting to see what happens.
Absolutely, as I would too.
And even if there's great demand
I don't like it, but I would do the same thing.
Even if there's great demand for their products, they won't make products.
What product does Goldman Sachs produce?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, and I think Goldman Sachs, that's part of the problem. I mean,
you'll find no defender of Goldman Sachs here.
Needs to have regulation so they're not gambling with our economy.
I've told you before. Well, which is it, Mark? Are they gambling or are they hoarding? Which one are they doing?
Well, Goldman Sachs is gambling.
They're gambling. What's JP Morgan doing?
More like hoarding.
I think JP Morgan.
They're gambling too.
Yeah, they just lost $2 billion.
They're doing both.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to give our listeners a chance to call in. All you have to do is dial 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275, and we'll take your calls. We'll be right back after this.
Saving for retirement might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. Like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.org.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. My guest is conservative strategist Matt Robbins. He and I disagree on many things, except that we agree that these debates are worthwhile and important for the American people. We're talking about the economy, because let's face it, this election, I'm sure Matt will agree with me, will be decided almost entirely on the economy. Maybe 10, 20% will vote on other issues, but the vast majority of the American people are going to vote on the economy. And I think, Matt, this is going to be a referendum on whether or not we need to go back to the days of George W. Bush, because it seems to me that Mitt Romney, through his advisors, through his policies, is basically endorsing Bush's policies. He's endorsing the Republican position of austerity, the Republican position that we have too much economic growth and we need to cut back on economic growth by cutting government spending and by really, as Eric Cantor put it, increasing tax on the middle class. But Eric Cantor said just the other day.
Is he campaigning on that, Leader Cantor, this fall?
I don't know whether he is or he isn't.
I don't know any Republican
Eric Cantor
was
famously asked about the 40 to 50% of Americans that don't pay federal income tax. Whenever that's pointed out to me, I always point out how they pay sales taxes and payroll taxes and Medicare taxes and sometimes state income taxes or city.
And receive earned income credit taxes and all those good things.
Which Ronald Reagan actually proposed and first supported.
It wasn't any good then.
Yes, Ronald Reagan's a liberal in your view.
Not at all. Not at all.
Too far to the left.
He made some very good concessions. He did to get his overall agenda made.
Oh, okay. That's
to
how
win the Cold War.
All right. He thought it was a good thing. He thought it was a good thing at the time. I actually think your Republican Party is so far to the right of Reagan now that he'd be considered a moderate today.
You insult me by calling me a Republican.
Excuse me. Fine, you're to the right of Republicans or Attila the Hun or whomever. I don't know. But my point is this: that the Mitt Romney budget plans, the Mitt Romney budget people, seems to want to go back to the George Bush days of not regulating financial service companies. They're against the Dodd-Frank bill, of allowing Wall Street and J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs and others to gamble so much that if they fail, they become too big to fail, just like Lehman Brothers, just like Bear Stearns, at least on the issue of financial regulation. Because you seem reasonable on that one.
I try to be.
Don't we need to regulate these big companies so they're not too big to fail? And if so, don't you think that regulation like Dodd-Frank, and you can tell me where you quibble with it, but things like the Dodd-Frank, like the Volcker Rule, things that say that we should not have an economy where rich corporations can gamble, and if they win, they get the money, and if they lose, we, the taxpayers, pay them. We need to not have that part of our economy. And that's what Dodd-Frank and the Volcker Rule strive to do. You may say they're imperfect, but Mitt Romney seems to want to do nothing.
They're horribly imperfect. I mean, whether it's Sarbanes-Oxley, whether it's Dodd-Frank, whatever these laws are.
What's your solution?
I don't have a silver bullet, unfortunately. I think that Bowles-Simpson would go a long way towards some of these things.
Not toward financial regulation.
I think
Simpson-Bowles was about the deficit.
Absolutely, but I think the framework that it would create and the bipartisan comity that both people like Durbin, who endorsed it, would go a long way towards getting people talking about actual measures that would actually help the economy.
I'm all for bipartisanship and people working together and all of that.
I don't play one on TV.
But the Dodd-Frank bill, the Volcker Rule, I mean, Paul Volcker, as you know.
How many pages is Dodd-Frank? How many lawyers does the average small business have to hire to read through all that?
I used to work in Congress.
I know you did.
And the dirty little secret is that they would double space something and they would have really big margins. And so a bill that should be, 10 pages came down to about 60 pages according to their old rules. So according to those rules, it's like 900 pages.
But the regulatory
what it really
burden
is about 100 pages.
It's placing on people in the small and medium business
50
range.
pages. But the heart of the Volcker Rule, and as you know, Paul Volcker is a very well-respected former chairman of the Federal Reserve. Was appointed by Jimmy Carter and reappointed by Ronald Reagan. So this is not a
Although
guy.
some don't think the Federal Reserve should exist.
But you're not one of those.
I'm not one of those.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can argue
I
about
just
that
wanted
if you
to make
want
that
to.
point.
Yes, and there are people that think that whether or not there's a new discovery of gold in South Africa should increase our money supply or not. No, I am not a Ron Paul. I am not a Ron Paul supporter.
I just wanted to be fair to the argument.
If you don't want the Federal Reserve, you need some standard, and the only one I know of is gold. But getting back to Paul Volcker, he's appointed by Jimmy Carter. He's reappointed by Ronald Reagan. Sure. He very famously ended the stagflation of the 1970s, unemployment and inflation. This is a guy.
That was all him.
I think he did a tremendous job in doing that.
I think he was instrumental. I don't think it was all him.
I
think bold leadership from a new president.
He was definitely instrumental. Yes, Ronald Reagan gave us massive deficits, but
he did.
In any case, the thing about Paul Volcker is you can't dismiss him lightly. He's
I
a
agree.
very respected voice. And all Paul Volcker has said is that if a company is gambling, it should take, and it gets the benefit of taking the risk. It gets all the money for taking the risk. It should also bear the loss
Seems
of
fair to
taking
me.
the risk. And it shouldn't be where banks, for example, get federal deposit insurance so that if they lose the money, there's a bailout for them.
Well, these are not even just banks anymore. These are multinational corporations with interests
their
across the globe.
Yeah, but if you look at J.P. Morgan,
Right.
okay, it is primarily a bank, but it's also a brokerage firm. It's all those things.
Agreed.
It does all those things. But one of the things I found most interesting is the money they gamble with tends to be the bank deposits and not the other stuff.
Yeah.
And the reason they gamble with the bank deposits is because they know if they lose it,
insured, absolutely.
taxpayers will come
Absolutely.
in. Let me suggest to you that Paul Volcker's, there's really only two solutions. One is to simply deny them FDIC insurance, which I'm okay with if that's your solution. The other solution, the more modest solution, is because they're not going to accept that, and if they don't accept it and they can't gamble at all, they'll be very unhappy.
Right.
But I'd be fine with just saying, you gamble, no insurance for you. No one will deposit any money in their banks, and they'll go out of business. I'm fine with that. The other, I think, more modest alternative is the Volcker rule embodied in the Dodd-Frank bill that says that if you're going to gamble, all right, it can't be with federally insured deposits. Gamble with your own money and don't take a risk that will cause a systemic risk to the economy. What's wrong
Mark,
with that?
this sounds so wonderful and it sounds so sensible.
It does.
And this,
so I'm glad to know you agree.
This president
I'm glad to know you agree.
is so in bed with these Wall Street bankers, it's not even funny. Only in the last 6 to 9 months have these clowns started coming out and withholding their Fifth Avenue fundraisers from him, withholding.
They're giving a lot more money to Mitt Romney than
they are now because they're so angry at the rhetoric he's used against them, which again I'm fine with.
What's wrong with Dodd-Frank?
Let's cut the crap.
What's wrong with the Volcker rule? Let's just be very specific.
The spirit of these regulations is fine.
Okay.
Again, the regulatory burden.
The spirit is good.
The regulatory burden these things
Great.
place.
So
on
you and I
small to
agree
medium businesses
the legislation.
is an economic nightmare.
The legislation
and
is
part
good.
of the reason why those trillions of dollars are still on the sidelines.
So we agree the legislation is good. It's
the
just
spirit
It's
is
just
good.
a
I didn't say the
matter
legislation was good.
of having the right. What the legislation does is it gives the SEC
Right.
and other bank regulators,
a formerly toothless organization,
like the Federal Reserve, the power to enforce the Volcker rule through regulations. Okay?
Correct.
Right. So we both agree that the idea
spirit.
is good, and the question will be what regulations they develop. Now, as you know, Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan,
Right.
CEO, the one who's
He's
supposed to run
testifying
banks
tomorrow, is that right?
I look forward to watching it.
That'll be a hoot.
It'll be a hoot. Was working very quietly with his lobbyists and other bankers to make these regulations as toothless as possible.
This is my shock face.
He wasn't the only. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. He wasn't the only one doing it. They were all doing it. They were all making it as weak as possible. And if he hadn't lost $2 billion gambling, he might have gotten away with it. Can you and I agree together that these regulations need to be strong, enforceable regulations to prevent this thing from ever happening?
I think
again?
these regulations ought to be simpler than 60 pages. They ought to be far simpler than 2,400 pages or whatever the Health Care Act is. I think they ought to be very to the point. Crooks are crooks. I don't care the scale. I don't care the size.
Okay.
If you commit an act like that, you're going away.
Okay, but Matt, as you know, the banks will argue. Hedging is fine.
Right.
Gambling
Derivatives
is not fine.
are great.
Derivatives are fine
Right.
if you've got
Credit
the credit
swaps.
instrument, but not if you're a
Right.
client. They're gonna. It's not the regulator's fault that these regulations are 60 or 100 pages. It's the
Right.
banks who are trying to get exceptions to the Volcker rule.
I don't think you'll ever master
You
this beast.
and I can agree there should be as few exceptions as possible.
Absolutely.
All right, so
I don't
we
think
agree
there
on
should,
that.
I don't think there's.
So what's the problem with Dodd-Frank? That's the bill that's allowing this to occur.
Well, is this the same Dodd who was on the Friends of Angelo countrywide mortgage program to get
Yes.
special mortgages and,
Yes.
and all these breaks?
Yes.
And regular.
But you
That's part
you
of
can
the
attack
problem,
the man
Mark.
all you want.
I'm not attacking the man. I'm attacking the culture.
The legislation.
This ruling class of both parties needs to be thrown out on their ass.
It's very easy to say. This
It's not
man's
easy.
bad.
My
That
job is
man's
to
not
replace
bad.
these people.
No, it's very easy.
That's what I do every day of my life.
Chris Dodd is retired. All right, you can't run against Chris Dodd.
And
I'm
wonderful.
sorry.
I'm glad he is.
You can't run against Chris Dodd.
Right.
But the legislation is what I'm talking
Sure.
about. And it sounds to me
There's
like
better solutions
you
than-
can't give
than
a
Dodd-Frank.
Well, what is it?
There are.
What is
I don't. Again, I'm
you
not,
don't have one.
I'm not an economist.
Well, if you don't have one,
I'm not.
then it's the best
But
solution you know of.
Currently, I would begrudgingly give you that.
All right, I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it and run with it. The best solution Matt Robinson knows of. You heard that. We may actually
We've got
have
it on tape.
we may have to write that down. The best solution a conservative knows of. Dodd-Frank.
Wow.
I'll
I think
take
I said
that.
only.
I'll take that and I'll move on. I'll just grab that and
keep
move on.
going.
I unfortunately have to talk about Wisconsin.
Let's do.
I know that you're gloating and excited and really, really excited about taking on.
I think it's a great day for America.
I think that any time the working people lose representatives lose a voice.
The downtrodden.
Well, it's not just the downtrodden, it's the middle class. I think the middle class has gotten a real royal...
That's what I think of when I think of government employees. I think of middle class and lower middle class. That's exactly who I think of.
That's exactly right.
I don't think of Cadillac pension plans and benefits and 20-year stints that guarantee you 30 years of retirement pay at 90% levels. I don't think of those things.
Government employees, dollar for dollar, education level for education level, make less than the private sector.
I just heard those stats yesterday.
Whether you can comparing janitors or government law. Look, I know as a government lawyer, I used to be a private lawyer.
I agree.
I assure you, I made a lot more money at the private sector.
At the top professional levels
than I did
of
the
accountants, doctors, lawyers, I agree. Everyone else that fills the vast majority of the Washington, D.C. Beltway at those middle and lower levels are making out like bandits compared to their counterparts. And
I don't know that
Fairfax County, Virginia, Arlington County, Virginia are the wealthiest counties in the Montgomery County, Maryland, in the nation. Why is that, Mark?
Not because of government janitors.
No, they're bureaucrats.
They're bureaucrats.
They're bureaucrats.
Right. Bureaucrats who level per level
member unionized federal union. That's what they are.
What I think that shows is that unions have power.
They have had way too much power.
And that unions actually get a good deal for people.
Public unions have had way too much power.
What Scott Walker said.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Samuel Gompers, George Meany, all heroes of labor, everyone said public employees, government employees should never have any right.
What they said was in the 1930s we need to focus on private because there was no unions.
Those three gentlemen have traversed decades.
What the Republicans have done, and what Scott Walker very famously said to the woman who was giving him millions of dollars to fight the unions, is he said, it's all about divide and conquer. We have practically killed private unions.
And we never do that on the left.
I want to know if you think this strategy is right on the right, because we're talking about Wisconsin. You can tell me what you don't like about the left in our next segment. But only 7% of American workers in the private sector are part of a union. Now that's a dramatic decline. It used to be 30, 40%.
Right.
It is, and we've killed off the private unions, basically what he's telling this woman. Now we can kill off the public unions, and then after we do that, we go back to the private, we go back and forth, because what unions do, which is unfortunate for employers, is they not only raise the level of income and worker standards and things like weekends and overtimes that I know you hate. I know you hate weekends.
I do.
I know you hate overtime. But when they raise the benefits for union workers, guess what? They peel off the non-union workers too. The union workers do better, but they lead the way. When union workers get weekends, suddenly non-union workers get weekends.
Friend,
when union workers get overtime, non-union workers get overtime.
You're living in a Clint Eastwood movie called Gran Torino. That's what you're doing right now.
Now that we're doing divide and conquer.
Those days are past.
Well, they are past. And they're past because your party is out to destroy unions.
I thought they were long gone because of globalization and the economic village that Bill Clinton and others opened up in the 90s.
You want 12-year-olds in China making our products rather than American.
Not at all. I would love for Americans to make my cars if they didn't charge $58 an hour for an uneducated high school dropout.
What if they charge $8 an hour? And the Chinese 14-year-old charges 50 cents an hour? You're going to go to the Chinese.
Now we're going micro here. No, again, you'll find no defender.
We have to take another break.
Sure.
I do want to encourage folks, if you want to join the debate, you can. It is 888-488-MARK. We'll be right back after this.
I need a job.
Necesito trabajo.
I would like to speak English better.
Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
Por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
El Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals,
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
are a small part of what we do.
Son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia.
Comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
Ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey, Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. If you want to join this debate, you can. Just pick up the phone and dial 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Locally, it's 571-749-1166. I used to work in Congress for the Democrats. My guest is Matt Robbins, a conservative strategist. You're getting both sides, but you can feel free to call in, disagree with either of us or both of us if you want to. Feel free. We'd love to hear from you.
Unless you're a corporation.
Unless you're a corporation. If you're a corporation, you're not allowed to call because corporations can't dial phones. Did you know that, Matt Robbins?
I did know that.
They cannot. They have no hands. Exactly. The people who work for them have hands, right, but not the corporations themselves. We were talking in the break about Scott Walker. It seems to me that there are ways where you can have Republicans attack unions that are, let's say, better than Scott Walker's. Mitch Daniels, for example, of Indiana.
Mitch Daniels did it years ago without so much as a whimper.
And I think the reason is because he didn't take away collective bargaining rights. What he says is you can bargain all you want, but we're going to have a negotiation, and it will come to the table, and we'll come to something we can both agree with.
It's sort of the same thing, but okay.
But Scott Walker said, no, you have no right to the table, no right to bargain.
He led with his chin.
Right. Don't you think that Mitch Daniels fights his battles better than Scott Walker?
My man Mitch is a smart, savvy operator. He's
I didn't think
understated. He is subtle. He is everything that many of our governors these days are not, and it's worked. Indiana is one of the most practical and pragmatic and successful economic states.
And they did have moderate Democrats,
in the union.
Senator Bai and others.
Who couldn't take the heat in Congress any longer and had to leave.
Well, a lot of people can't take the heat.
That's
Olympia
right.
Snow couldn't take the heat. Moderate Republicans couldn't take the heat anymore. You and I both recognize, and as does Senator Bai and Senator Snow, moderate Democrat, moderate Republican, that we are in a more partisan country than probably any time in our lifetimes. In fact, I would suggest we are probably more partisan than at any time since the Civil War.
Wow.
I think so. I mean, I can see it. I see it in the media. We have Fox News for the Republicans and MSNBC for the Democrats. We have in Congress, because of gerrymandering, there used to be conservative Democrats. There used to be liberal Republicans.
Right.
I mean, those words did not used to be oxymorons. They are today. And I think it's a shame because I think that there are things that reasonable people could agree on. Simpson Bowles, for example. And Richard Lugar, speaking of Indiana, I think is a classic example because this is a man who's a conservative Republican.
Not true.
And had an 85% rating. And he was thrown out by a guy who said he will not compromise.
He's been off the reservation, Lugar's, for quite some time.
Oh, Lugar's now a rhino, a Republican in name only?
He's been a rhino for many, many decades.
What?
Absolutely.
Tell me how so.
Only
from your perch can Richard Lugar
I was going to tell you,
seem to be a conservative.
When you talk, and we'll get to that, I'll do this to get there, because you said a minute ago we're as partisanly divided as we have been since the Civil War. Let me present to you a different worldview. I know it's hard for folks on the left and for Democrats and liberals and folks who've been in D.C. and worked in D.C. all their lives and been around this. The progressive experiment, the big spending government that's been going on for about a century now, and the 40
New Deal,
and all of it under the hood.
Social Security.
Hold on, now just let me finish.
All right, go ahead.
All of this under the hood, the 40 or 50 years when Rostenkowski and all these guys were never challenged. Republicans could never mount an effective challenge to any legislation. LBJ steamrolled everybody. All these great things. There has been a very silent majority, to borrow Nixon's phrase, of Americans who don't like what they've seen, who didn't like a government that didn't reflect their values, didn't reflect their spending attitudes, and there was never an option. Now we have a healthy, vigorous debate. I don't always agree with the Republican camp. I don't always agree with the Democrat camp. I see some commonalities in the two, but I am very glad that for once in the past 20 years, since 94, not even 20 years now, we have an actual opponent who can stand up and say, stop this insanity. Let's talk about the debt ceiling. Let's talk about these insane measures we keep adding to the deficit and the debt. Let's think about these things before we go forward.
Let me suggest to you that it is precisely the Republican threat not to pay our debts. Is precisely,
and I didn't want to go down that hole.
Well, but it's precisely.
But you asked me about Lugar, and Lugar stopped being
he stopped
being a practical conservative legislator
when he compromised with Democrats.
No, that's not it. That's not it at all. Lugar, and I'm a big foreign policy buff, and we understand that the American,
we're going to talk about
the American military and foreign policy apparatus is enormous.
Right.
God bless Lugar for doing the START Treaty and trying the New START Treaty and different
how
things.
is he not a
He became
conservative?
an elder statesman. He stopped worrying about the fundamentals of the economy. He stopped worrying about the actual taxpayers of Indiana, the actual taxpayers of this country.
How can you say that? What name one vote you didn't appreciate, didn't like with Richard Lugar?
Gosh, I'm totally blanking at the moment, but I've seen several of his disdainful attitudes towards the voters.
I'm not even defending
He viewed
Richard
himself
Lugar.
as a creature here in D.C.
As far as I'm concerned, he was a right-wing conservative.
Wow.
And I guess from my perch,
Wow.
I can't tell the difference
Yeah.
between right, further right, and crazy right.
We're not monolithic.
I have a
on
hard
this
time.
side. We're really not.
In seeing that. But
the DREAM Act it was a bad vote. It was
The
bad
DREAM
fiscally.
Act.
It was bad socially.
the act that says the kids who come here through no fault of their own,
It's a bad act.
because they're 4 years old and they're brought across
Mark.
the border from their parents,
Mark.
should not have a chance to pursue the American dream.
You can couch it as condescendingly as you want.
It's not condescendingly.
Many
that's what the
many
DREAM Act did.
Americans who play by the rules and see their kids not able to go to in-state colleges for in-state tuition rates have real problems with this act.
What kids can't go to
I'm sorry,
colleges?
out-of-state colleges at the in-state rates. The DREAM Act provides for illegal aliens to go to college at a cheaper rate than American citizens. That's
the DREAM
fundamentally
Act
unfair.
provides that people who live
And
in
it's not even enacted, so we shouldn't even argue about
the
it.
DREAM bill, if you will.
There we go.
Says that if you've lived in California your entire life since
Right.
you were 4,
Right.
you can get in-state tuition just like any other Californian person who moves to California.
I believe it has some
1
allowances
year
for out-of-state
before.
as well.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It gives.
I stand corrected in that case.
You're saying that it's unfair for someone who came to California from Mexico when they're 4
I'm
to
saying
get California
American
tuition
citizens
when
go
a
first.
Montanan cannot.
I'm saying American citizens go first.
I'm saying that you can't blame the children for
I'm
the
not
sins
blaming
of
the children.
parents.
I'm talking about sovereignty. I'm talking about principle. I'm talking about philosophy here. And it's an honest disagreement.
It is an honest disagreement. I've never accused you of being dishonest. Ornery, perhaps, but I am too. So it's fair there. I want to address, though, the issue of default, because it seems to me when I'm thinking about the extremists and the parties,
because it's extreme to want to pay your bills.
it's extreme to say we're not going to pay our bills. For 220 odd years, from the time of the American Revolution to today, through the Civil War,
So that makes it right.
When the union actually printed money for the first time and used that money, we have paid our debts. This Republican Speaker Boehner, although I don't think he meant it.
He didn't.
I think he was pushed by his Tea Party people.
Yeah, I agree.
But suggested for the first time in American history that we shouldn't pay our debts. When that happened, for the first time in American history, Standard & Poor's and Moody's cut our rating from AAA to AA for the first time in American history. And if you note, that's when our economy took a big hit in 2011. That's when the uncertainty began, because our
That's when it
economy
started.
was coming out. Just look at the
It
numbers.
didn't start in 08, 09.
No, it was terrible in 08 and 09, but we were coming out of it with the stimulus.
So the other two
29,
chambers of government,
2010,
the executive
2011.
branch, the Democrat Senate, had nothing to do with this.
Well, the House alone can say we're not going to pay our debts. As you know,
And so
all bills,
agreed,
all
power
bills
of the
to pay
purse,
the
as I
debt
said earlier.
start in the House of
Power of
Representatives.
the purse.
And when you have the Speaker of the House
But no leadership from the president, no real compromise.
Well, you say there's no leadership from the president.
I do say
I
that.
know you got to remember last summer when the president was locked up in a room for days on end. I assure you,
was willing to give away the score.
Fun with him.
And was willing to give away 90%.
He was sitting with Boehner. He was sitting with Cantor.
Come on, you think that's not leaked? You think you believe that, really?
Under George Bush, under Bill Clinton, under Ronald Reagan, under Eisenhower, under every president in American history,
sound fiscal policy,
under every American,
kicking the can
there's
down the road.
not a single Congress in all of American history that has seriously suggested not paying back our debts until this one. In fact, the only question after the Civil War was whether or not to pay the Confederate war debts.
What was the key word
and
you used?
They decided not to.
What was the key word you used to Speaker Boehner? He suggested that we might not be willing to raise this debt ceiling automatically. He suggested that.
He did more than suggested.
He suggested something in Washington, D.C.
He insisted that he get everything
God
he wanted.
forbid you put your cards on the table and play them.
He insisted on getting a whole bunch of things in
And did he
return
get them?
for doing something. He got some of them.
He got some.
He got the fiscal cliff.
And had Obama and had the Democrats Senate been better players, they would have gotten more of what they wanted. They would have averted the crisis.
What he got, he took us, I think, 2 days to the government collapsing and us being Greece and us not paying our debt. That's called hardball, and you're okay with that?
I'm okay in a sense. I don't like the economic aftershocks, but I do not like the definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again.
Let me ask you this.
How far can we kick this can down the road?
Let me ask you this.
How far? Answer me that. How many debt ceilings can we erase? 300 more years?
I think the entire
200 more years?
I think the entire debt ceiling is unconstitutional.
Okay.
And I'll tell you
we
why.
agree it's an insane system.
It is an insane system.
Well,
and let me tell you why.
There's some people now finally saying, I don't want to play this anymore. It's an insane system.
Okay, well, two things. One, let me tell you why it's unconstitutional.
Please.
I'll just do that very briefly. In the 14th Amendment, this actually came after the Civil War.
Right.
The question of whether to pay the Confederate debt
Right.
came up, and they decided, nope, they're not going to pay
We
the
are all
Confederate
brothers
debt.
now, Lincoln
They're not going to
said.
pay the Confederate debt.
Right.
But, and it goes on to say that, we're not going to pay for any debt for any rebellion, but the validity of the public debt of the United States, authorized by law, shall not be questioned. I think the debt ceiling is unconstitutional. I think the 14th Amendment very clearly says pay your debts. If you don't like the way Congress spends money or taxes you,
right.
It's very simple. Congress can pass a bill to spend less or tax more. If that's what you want, Congress can do it. Rather than some kind of artificial debt ceiling, it's very simple. If you don't like a debt, don't run up a debt.
Agreed.
What you're saying is, oh, well, the government is running up all this debt. I'm not going to criticize them for that. I want them to chop off their hands after they spend the money.
You have to be fair to me. I've criticized the debt and the spending prior to this.
That's fair.
And I'm not talking about welching on debts.
Fair.
I'm talking about the Washington parlor games. That's what happened because
it's welching on debt.
Because some people in the White House
and I don't mean to insult the Welsh, who I'm sure are fine people. But
that's what happened when some people in the White House messed their pants because they couldn't play the game that Boehner was playing. They didn't understand how to play brinksmanship. Boehner doesn't want to default. The Tea Party members don't want to default.
I don't know about the Tea Party
they
members. Michelle Bachmann, I think, probably wanted to default.
And
I actually think many of the Tea Party members wanted to default.
No, they don't. I work with these people every single day of my life.
Speaker Boehner did not want to default, and you could see it in his face.
Right.
He was being shoved around.
He looked like he was a hostage.
He did, because really the entire economy.
He looked like Cory Booker.
Really the entire economy was being held hostage.
Right.
And I think this kind of extreme partisanship and extreme anger is not good for the country. There was
anger, though, Mark? I mean, the anger.
There was a time when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill could work together, and the two Irishmen would come home and have a drink.
Agreed.
And they would each get something.
And where's your president been the past few years? Has he visited Congress? I'm sorry, 3 times casually, informally? The members of his own party complain he doesn't come and visit the leadership of the committees.
He had a health care forum. He's had Boehner and Kenner in his office so many times.
A couple of years ago. I disagree with that.
Last year.
I think you'd be surprised.
All summer long until.
How seldom it is compared to an LBJ or a Bill Clinton. I think you'd be surprised. He's a very aloof, cold president.
LBJ was a master.
Absolutely.
There's no question.
Spent his whole life there.
LBJ knew how to twist every arm in the book. He knew where all the bodies were buried.
Absolutely.
No one compared. And I'll agree with you that Obama is not the pole.
He's not.
That LBJ
and that has consequences. That has price.
And that has consequences.
It does.
And that's true.
And that's what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about the macro effect. I'm talking about the actual parlor game of power.
What I'm telling you is that your party, and to the extent that you accept it as your party.
No, it is. I mean, it has to be.
Is playing with fire.
They are.
Whether it's filibustering.
As is the federal government.
Well, it's filibustering things that have never been filibustered before. It's threatening not to pay our debts for the first time ever before.
Not passing Senate budgets that have never been passed before.
Well, they can't do it because of filibuster.
Now.
Right, because of filibusters.
Right, that's the reason.
You can't, stopping Obama's nominees in a way that's never been done before. They're really pushing limits. And let me suggest to you that this kind of minority hardball will backfire because even if you do get a president, the Democrats will be required to play the same game in Washington, and nothing will ever get done.
Who's required? I mean, aren't there any adults in the room?
It cannot be that the Republicans can stifle everything Obama wants to do, but you expect the Democrats to go along with Romney.
I thought we spent the last 3 years doing everything Obama wanted to do.
Well, obviously they did. Folks, if you want to call in, 888-488-MARK. The last segment's coming up. We're going to talk about Syria.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfrip at AOL.com.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. This is the last segment, your last chance to call in. 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. That's the toll-free number. The local number is 571-749-1166. My guest is Matt Robbins. He's a conservative strategist, and we're talking about the dysfunction in government. Now, Matt, the approval rating for Congress, I think, has now finally hit the single digits.
And 8%, I think.
I don't know that it's ever been in the single digits in my lifetime before. That's amazing. That's amazing. Less than 10% approve of Congress.
It's about right, I think.
And I can suggest to you that I think one of the reasons is because there's no compromise. And I would suggest to you one of the main reasons there's no compromise is precisely because of the Tea Party, which, I mean, if you're in any wing of the Republican Party, you're the Tea Party wing. I mean, these are your people, right?
Sure.
Pretty much.
I'll give you
most
that.
of that. Yeah. And you think the biggest issue is government spending. It's out of control government spending.
It's a threat.
But the Tea Party didn't exist in 02, 03, 04,
Correct.
05,
they were
06,
asleep.
07. George W. Bush was president.
They started waking up in 06.
Window.
They started waking up in 06. They did.
Was there something in 06?
No, but they started, I mean, the rumblings began, the voices began.
I think what happens is Republicans want lots of government spending when they're in power. But when the Democrats are in power, they're opposed to government spending. And because Republicans have priorities like corporate welfare and aid to the military, things like that, Democrats
so they
have
get all the
priorities
credit for philosophically decrying all these things while the opposition's in power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would prefer the
Again,
Republicans.
this is my shocked face that parties do this.
I'd prefer the Republicans just be honest and say, look, we don't believe that money should go to Social Security and health care and education. We believe the money should go to military and oil companies.
That's not true.
And therefore, you know, we like when those things are spent. We don't. Instead, they play this really crazy game, which I think is fascinating. That because I remember way back, Reagan and George Bush Sr., the Republicans loved government spending. They hated it under Bill Clinton. They loved it again under George W. Bush
more than Reagan.
And they hated it under Obama.
Bush Sr. more than Reagan loved government spending.
Well,
I mean, Reagan spent insane levels on military because of one reason.
Reagan gave us a bigger deficit than Carter.
But what was his reason in doing it? To end the threat of the Cold War. He believed that he could do it.
The point is that Reagan spent more than Carter. They complained about Carter. Reagan spent more than Carter.
They did.
Bush spent more than Reagan. Clinton spent less than George Bush Sr.
With a Republican Congress.
George Bush Jr. spent more, and Obama. But my point is, Republicans only complain when a Democrat's in power. To me, that suggests not your inconsistency, but your party's inconsistency.
No, I think it's a valid criticism.
And it's one that...
I think you'll find that, you know, I just like the phrase Tea Party or 9/12 or Liberty Movement, whatever you want to call the Ron Paul folks. There is an awakening going on in this country, and there has been going on for some years now with information, with the internet, and with information being available at all times, and sort of Lucy moving the football time and time again. Charlie Brown's finally sort of realizing that either party, this ruling class, the perpetual Bob Bennett's in Utah, the perpetual Dick Lugers, the perpetual people in Washington, D.C., who are rubber stamping these spending measures regardless of party.
But see, you're blaming...
And they call themselves conservatives, and that's really insulting to the true conservatives. They just want folks they think like you do. They want folks to do what they say they're going to do.
But see, you're blaming the people in Washington, and I want to suggest to you the people in Washington generally represent the people at home.
Oh, I disagree.
In other words, people at home don't want
at
the
Social
Social
Security.
Security...
At the congressional level they do. The House level they do sometimes.
They don't want the Social Security
The senatorial level, you tell me the last hard-pressed U.S. senator ran a race.
Well,
seriously, that sweated it.
Because the filibusters, the Senate gets nothing done. But
I mean re-election. They don't sweat their re-elections because they're not worried about it.
Well, most House members don't worry about it.
Agreed. That's a problem.
It is a problem.
I spend my days trying to fire incumbents.
I want to address the issue of government policy because you're saying that basically America wants austerity. That America wants spending to be cut. I think they don't. I think Americans like their Social Security checks.
I think a majority of Americans agree with you.
They like their Medicare. Many like government spending on military. Most students
but you
want
talked
their student
about going
loans.
over the cliff earlier.
Farmers want their subsidies, and nobody likes to pay higher taxes. Now, it suggests to me that austerity, nobody likes austerity.
P.J. O'Rourke wrote a book about this 20 years ago. Parliament of Whores.
It's very simple. If I'm a farmer, I want my subsidies. I might not care about your student loans. If I'm a student, I want my loans.
But
I may
Mark,
not care about your Medicare.
You
And if
used
I'm over
the phrase-
65, I want my Medicare and Social Security.
You used the
but I
phrase
don't
going
care
off
about
the cliff when we started the show.
Right.
Somebody's got to be the adult in the room. We're going to go talk to high schoolers in a few minutes and debate in front of them.
Yes.
High schoolers want everything. They want their iPods, their iPads,
So do adults.
their cars. Agreed. It's human nature.
Of course it is.
Somebody in government has to say, I'm sorry.
The Romans
there's
ran on
no
what?
more
lions
money
and,
this week.
So here's the thing. Since we agree, and I agree, in fact, it would have been interesting. I didn't know you 10 years ago, but I've been doing this show since 2005.
Right.
In 2005 and 2006, when I began the Inside Scoop, I was arguing for fiscally conservative policies.
God bless you.
You may be surprised. I thought the economy was fine. I thought it was time to pay back the debts. I thought the Bush tax cuts were an incredible mistake.
You were a Tea Partier before Tea Partier was cool?
No, I wasn't Tea Partier.
I'm kidding you.
Obviously. My point was I supported austerity because we could afford it then.
Right.
I don't support it now because I don't think we can afford it now. I actually think I'm consistent that I think we spend in bad times and save in good times.
Yeah.
And what bothers me is the people that pretend that spending is never good and those that pretend that spending is always good. I disagree with both of them.
Agreed.
All
I
right,
think we've
so we
got
have some
Mr. Big
agreement
Spender
there.
in the White House right now. Who's
I don't think so.
Never truly talked about saving.
It's
or
hard
being
to know because
discretionary.
Obama has only been president during a recession.
Right, and none of this is his fault. None of it.
Not the recession.
He hasn't prolonged any of it.
Absolutely not.
None.
Well, according
not
to
one day.
According to the
82,000 jobs created last quarter or last month. I'm sorry. Yeah. Worst report in what? Years?
No, actually, there was job losses of 700,000 a month, you may recall, during the last year of the Bush presidency on through the beginning of the Obama presidency. So it's better to create jobs than to lose jobs.
I agree, and net plus
and
is
one of the
better.
things that we find, interestingly enough, is that the public sector has lost jobs month after month,
precious
while the
government
private
employees.
sector has gained jobs. Yes, those precious teachers, firefighters, police officers,
and there's no
who I
fraud,
think
waste,
are
and
important,
abuse.
valuable people
There's
to our
no fraud, waste,
society.
and abuse in those sectors.
There's fraud, waste, and abuse everywhere.
Agreed.
But if you're going
but
to
not
complain,
on my taxpayer dime, there's not.
If you find fraud, waste, and abuse, fire those people.
You can't when there's collective bargaining, Mark. You can't.
Of course you
when
can.
Unions are muscled like that.
Of course you
there's
can.
No way.
What unions do is they create a standard for everybody. You got a bad teacher, you got a bad firefighter.
They create real immobility.
Fire
they really
them.
do. It
I have no
happen.
problem with
That's
that.
reality.
You give them a hearing. I think it's fair to give them a hearing.
Yeah.
And you give the evidence that they're bad workers, and
it's
then
coercive.
you fire.
It starts from the minute you collect
and then you
dues.
fire them.
The minute you start collecting dues, the coercion begins.
My point is this. My point is that most Americans support government programs that exist today.
Most Americans would like to win the lottery, Mark. They would like to be on American Idol.
That's true. And so that's
not reality.
But what you're preaching, and I don't think Americans understand this, what Mitt Romney is preaching, Republicans talk all the time about stop government spending, but they almost never say where or what. And that's a very clever thing to do.
Sure.
Because once you start mentioning the Senate...
Much like Democrats promising all spending to all people. That's a very clever thing to do.
Well, not to all people. We want to cut military spending. We want to cut corporate welfare.
Okay.
It's interesting. One of the things the parties agreed on, you're going to like this.
Sure.
Something the Senate did that Matt Robbins is going to like, that Mark Levine likes as well.
I'm glad I'm sitting down.
Just this week, you may not have heard, they had a vote to cut, in a small way, I wish it were greater, but to cut agricultural subsidies.
All for it.
And you and I agree,
for it.
and it was 9-8. It was bipartisan.
All for it.
So this is the point of our
Absolutely.
agreement. We agree on that.
All for it.
Unfortunately, in cutting them, they put a few new ones in, but the new ones were less than the old ones they cut. So it's going in the right direction. I don't think we should pay people not to grow crops.
I agree.
There you go.
I agree.
I also don't think, let me give you another piece of corporate welfare. I want to know how you feel about that. Well, the reason I say corporate is because a lot of the big farmers are corporations.
I don't like welfare in general.
But as you may know, oil companies are trying to get new shale oil via fracking and so forth.
Sure.
And they want to do it underneath our national parks, our national lands. Now,
Which ones?
All across the East Coast. Actually, most of Mississippi. There's an article in the Washington Post.
I did miss that.
You should look it up. But they've done it in the West, now they're doing it in the East. And they're leasing the land for $47 an acre. Now, apparently in the private sphere, this can be hundreds to thousands of dollars.
Goodness.
And we're giving it to them for $47. That
Who's in
is
charge
corporate
of the parks
welfare
right now?
It is.
Who's Obama's Interior Secretary right now?
I'm complaining about it. I'm telling you. I think Obama's doing wrong now. They're getting support from oil interests, and I don't support that.
Sure. If I'm an oil company, if I'm a private sector interest, I'm going to get the best deal I can.
Of course you can. And it's the government's role to stop them from doing that. And so we agree on that too. We only got about 3 minutes left. I want to switch topics to the other side of the world.
It's very sad.
What's going on in Syria is more than sad. It's an atrocity.
It is.
It is a dictator who is massacring his own people, and in really brutal fashion.
Groups of his own people.
This isn't just, as if that weren't bad enough, mowing down people who are protesting against him. That's bad. That's horrible. This is worse. He's going into private homes, massacring children. There was an article just recently about an 11-year-old boy who covered himself with the blood of his 6-year-old brother, pretended to be dead, and survived that
And
way.
it's got an ethnic angle to it as well.
Well, it's more of a religious angle, actually.
Right.
The Shia
Syria is
Alawi government.
Such an artificially constructed country.
Well, Syria has
strange
Shia and Sunni
minority
and Druze
that rules
and
the country.
11, 13% Christian. It's got all kinds. And yes, the Alawi are ruling the country.
It's very bizarre.
I want to see, and I'm more than willing to criticize the president. I just did on the land management. I want to see President Obama take a stronger stand in Syria. I want to see us actually go as far. I'd be willing to go as far as we did in Libya, frankly. I don't want troops on the ground.
Lead from behind.
But at the very least, I think we need to arm them. The Syrian Free Army is starting to gain some traction, gain some ground. And I agree that we don't know entirely who they are. That's true.
Yeah.
But
which we still don't in Libya.
To me, but you know what?
Months later.
But Libya, the Libyan
they raised
government.
the black flag of Al Qaeda when they won. When they took Benghazi.
You say
they did.
You say they.
There's footage.
Well, I'm sure some people.
There's video footage. But several hundred people did.
But they weren't the people in the Libyan National Council running the country.
Just telling you what I saw on the video.
The fact that a few people did these things. My point is this: when Assad is doing this kind of atrocity, at some point you have to take a leap of faith. And I think the revolution in Syria is going to happen. And the only question is whether we're on their side or not. And I think that we jumped ship properly in Egypt when Mubarak was going.
Oh my gosh.
We maybe should have done it sooner. But the Syrian revolution is going to happen, and I think the Syrian people will long remember.
We're reacting on the foreign stage.
I think the Syrian people will long remember whether we were helping them stop their dictator or not. I think the Libyan people will be forever grateful and supportive of the United States based on what we did. We'll see. Time will tell.
I'd like to believe that.
Time will tell.
I think Syria will always see itself as a satellite of Russia. They will
I don't
always
think so.
see themselves
I
that
think
way.
the Assad government does.
The Orthodox strain that runs through that country.
I don't think so.
I think it'll always.
I don't think so. And I've had people with the Syrian Free Army on my show, and maybe they're just using me. You know, it's hard to tell. But they seem to be honest people who are trying and fighting for their country, and just want some Americans' help to. I'd like to see us arm them, train them even, and even I'd be willing to give air support. I'd be willing to go that far.
Wow.
I don't think it would cost us that much. It would not be an invasion like Iraq or Afghanistan. I'm not going to say it's going to be a cakewalk.
And I'm not trying to be glib.
No. But
it's funny that the positions are flipped.
Listen, I don't think it's a liberal or conservative issue. I'm just expressing my opinion.
Right.
I think it is. I think we should have acted in Kosovo. I supported that.
Right.
I also think we should have acted in Rwanda and Sudan and Darfur, and we didn't.
Yeah.
In the 30 seconds we have remaining, what do you think? You support my ideas here?
I support the things you're talking about. It's very thorny. McCain has stood up and talked about this.
Yes, I'm with John McCain on this issue.
Right.
I am.
I'm very hesitant to go into a country that's this fragmented. Bosnia, Kosovo, I've been there 7 times in the Balkans. It's still a bad scene. Did we do the right thing in stopping the carnage?
I think we
did.
We need to
I
do
don't
it
know
now.
how to solve the problem.
They need us. Sometimes the United States has to lead. Sometimes President Obama has to lead. Thank you, Matt.
I agree with that last part.
For coming on the show.
Thank you, Mark.
And we will be sure to debate these issues into the future. Folks, if you want to get more information on this show, leave a comment at marklevinetalk.com. Be glad to hear from you. We're here every week, Monday night on Channel